One of the things you could do, obviously, and one of the things that I do, is I ask my clients beforehand if they would, not an overwhelming 7-page detailed questionnaire. That's not helpful for them. That paralyzes them more. Simply giving me a list of their goals. What is your goal? And that helps them to orient themselves towards what it is that they'd like to achieve. Some of them are much more specific than others, you know. Oh, I'd like to be debt-free. Different from, oh, I'd like to know exactly what a good budget would be. And I'd like to know exactly how it is that I could sort out my resources. I'd like to know exactly what kind of payment plan I might be able to offer to the trustee or to my debtors. But you start with where they are. And you ask them, hey, I have a brief questionnaire. I just want to know what your goals are in meeting with me. And that way, we can be on the same page starting at the same time. You get that. And when you get that, either at the time that they make their first appointment with you or when they first come in the office, and you say, oh, I see what your goals are. And you know, that's exactly where we have to start, where what your goals are. Good questions are what questions and how questions. Okay, we have the what the goals are. Now, let's do the how. Let me help you to get to how it is that we do this differently. Because you didn't get into debt overnight. And you won't get out of debt overnight, but it's doable. We have to offer, both as mental health counselors and as attorneys, some hope for the individual, some way of them feeling that they can resolve that issue. That they're not, because they're already feeling as though they're treading water and maybe gulping water. What we can share with them is that, no, here is a lifesaver. Here is a way that we can take it from where you are to where it is that you want to be.
What is that when it comes to families and friends that keeps people from perhaps following through and actually going ahead and filing the bankruptcy?
Well, they are fearful about embarrassment. They are fearful about being judged. They've been judged before. They're judging themselves. I have spoken in the past about how people are their own worst bullies. They beat up on themselves. And they have a fan club about beating up on themselves. It may be their spouse, it may be their parent, it may be their in-law, it may be their sibling. And one of the things that you're going to share with them is, no, we don't beat up on you here. We support what it is that you're going through. We know that it's an emotional issue, certainly a financial issue. It's an intellectual issue. That is, how are we going to work ourselves out of this? Some people have problem-solving skills, and other people are emotionally bound up with the worry and can't get to those problem-solving skills. And I perceive your role as to helping them place that in an objective fashion, that is the debt that they have to resolve, so that they can take away their greatest resource. That is what they know they can do, and you can help them to know that.
What does a client need to think about when it comes to overcoming the premise that that they are their own worst enemy?
Well, it's interesting that you ask the word think, because people function in either thinking, feeling, or doing. And part of the issue is that they may not be thinking clearly because they are bound up in their feeling, and then that paralyzes them in terms of not being able to do. So we'll ask, okay, when you're thinking that way, how are you feeling? When you're feeling that way, what are you doing? And we fill in that triangle to say, okay, when you think that way, and that may be clear thinking, or it may be distorted, it may be confused thinking, because they're not attorneys, they're not counsels. They don't necessarily know how it is that their thinking is off base. Their feeling, they may be very overwhelmed, and you can assure them, no, hey, other people have been through this, you have many clients who have been in the same particular spot. You can share with them, yes, sometimes it takes people 6 months, sometimes it takes them 8 months, sometimes it takes them a year. It's a birth of a process, and the birth of a human is 9 months. I wouldn't anticipate that they'd be able to give birth to a resolve program in less than 9 months. And that's one of the things that you can share with them, that they have to consider There is an emotional aspect, there is an intellectual aspect, and there is an actual doing aspect. And you can help them to appreciate that.
What type of feelings would you anticipate someone experiencing once they've turned the page and the bankruptcy is complete?
Relief. Some of them, and I'm sure that you can appreciate this from your clients, some of them come in angry because they're angry because of a spouse's debt. They're angry because they weren't informed about how it is that they had gotten into a contract that wouldn't free them from that. They're angry that they had not foreseen a particular outcome, or they fantasize, they believe that, okay, the money was going to come in and then somebody disappointed them. The contract failed, their customer base dried up, their inheritance was taken away. Some other catastrophic injury, a roof being blown away, and their insurance not covering it, kept them from having those financial reserves for that catastrophe. And most of us are overwhelmed by those catastrophes, the medical catastrophes, the physical catastrophes, our house, our home, what it is that's happened. And we've gone along anticipating that everything was going to be okay and that we're going to have a job and being able to afford things, and then there's no job. So what we can share with them is that other people have been through this, and other people will be through this again, and you will help them develop a plan.
People have emerged on the other side of bankruptcy, as you said, relieved and exhilarated, and now it's time to rebuild their credit and perhaps walk some of those same roads that got them there to begin with. So what type of thinking do people need to keep in mind when they're back in the consumer consumption world?
Well, one of the takeaways after the bankruptcy has been resolved is to say, okay, how do we get through this? What is it that we did differently than you did before? What is it that were obstacles to you doing that before that you have now learned? What is the takeaway? So that just the resolution of the bankruptcy in the absence of doing an analysis about that leaves them unprepared for a new round of debt.
People don't usually exit bankruptcy without the tools necessary to analyze the takeaway.
Mm-hmm.
What is available to them in order for someone that says, I want to make sure I don't do this again, and I might need some guidance?
Well, certainly you having resources, if it was an emotional issue that brought them in, certainly a resource for that. If it was a planning issue, a financial planner for that. If it was a way to set aside particular funds so that certain catastrophic issues could be resolved, a resource for that. Whether or not they have automatic pay, both in terms of savings as well as debt, that would be another resolution. So they feel as though they have had all the tools that you know about. And certainly a follow-up with you 6 months, a year later, so that it's on their calendar that they say, okay, I'm going to go see Ryan again, and these are my goals. People are helped by doing that. They can then set aside in their mind some resolution of things that have been emotionally binding to them before.
Is there anything else you want to share with a bankruptcy client that needs help and is just struggling with the process?
Well, I like to use the geographical metaphor that denial is not just a river in Egypt, that people want to keep from admitting to those difficulties. Sometimes they're considered failures, sometimes they're considered errors, sometimes they're considered being put upon by others, and that the bankruptcy attorney allows them to free themselves of those things that they are not responsible for, and to accept the responsibility and find a way through that labyrinth, through that struggle, through that those issues of being able to resolve the dilemma they've been placed in.
How do you overcome the stigma of failure when you as a person, have identified that, or you're hung up on that term?
That's one of those what questions. Okay, what is it that you're thinking when it is that you've come in to declare this bankruptcy? Who is it that's going to be impacted by your declaration in public? And then we look at the punitive nature of humankind, those in-laws, those siblings, those parents, those spouses, and say, okay, maybe we have an issue with how it is that they are critiquing you. And certainly, as a bankruptcy attorney, you can share with them that besides those critical people, here are the things that I can help you with. And you know, if you need some help with some of those critical people and how it is they make you feel about yourself, I have a resource for you.
Tell me about when it comes to the critical people that you've mentioned, such as the in-laws. Isn't it true that sometimes as Americans, we don't talk about money as a culture in and of itself, so that everybody's kind of holding their cards close to their chest, and as a result, we might find that you may not be the first one to have filed for bankruptcy in the family. But that aside, why are we as Americans, why don't we talk about money?
There's an embarrassment, and there is a sense of security and privacy. People talk about money behind closed doors, sometimes not even with their spouses, their significant others. We are not, if you will, informed about money early enough on, so we have an emotional attachment to it. And sometimes that attachment is distorted. It's an interesting thing psychologically that takes place with accumulation of material things. There's an uplifting of one's spirit when one buys something. It triggers a certain neurochemical in the brain. And when it is, some people go shopping to do that. Some people fantasize about doing that, and they go to car showrooms, or they go to fairs, or they go to conventions in order to see boats or other things that they might like to have. And that's an uplifting kind of thing. But they're really not helped to budget, they're really not helped to talk about money, they're really not helped to guide them in terms of that kind of savings. Many people have difficulty in delaying the gratification for buying. They want it now. And it's not that they should be punished for that, but it's difficult for them to conserve because they don't know when that might otherwise come. So they take it now. And so there's a real difficulty in terms of how we as Americans have been educated, have been helped to appreciate the accumulation of wealth.